The woman was shaking as she tried for the fourth time to place the hydraulic jack under the car, which was covered in mud. Her high heels sank into the cracked asphalt, and every car honk passing by seemed to scream the same thing. "You're alone." That's when he appeared, thin, drenched, with a plastic bag tied around his feet as shoes. "Need help?" the boy asked, his fingers already dirty with grease before she even had a chance to answer. She hesitated, looked around. There was no one else. Just him, a street kid. And in less than 5 minutes the tire was changed. Before leaving, she did something she didn't quite understand herself. She handed him her business card and said, "If you ever need anything, look for me. I work at a dealership." At that moment she didn't know. He didn't either. But that gesture was going to change both of their lives. Forever. The rain fell lightly, constantly, as if someone up above was trying to wash the city of its sins. It was the kind of drizzle that made the world look gray, the time stand still and the chest feel heavier. On the corner of Franklin Avenue, traffic crawled, impatient, and between honks and high beams, a silver sedan was stopped on the shoulder, with its hazard lights flashing and one of its wheels sunken into the ground, missing the tire. Beside the car, a woman struggled with a hydraulic jack that kept slipping from the support point. Her tied-up hair was starting to come undone, her glasses were fogged up, and her hands were trembling. She wore a soaked navy blue blazer on her shoulders and high heels that sank into the cracked asphalt. Drivers sped by, swerving, honking, ignoring her. She was alone, and visibly on the brink of collapse. Across the street, watching everything closely like a hunter, a boy took shelter under the awning of a closed store. He looked to be about 13. His sneakers were worn out. The hood of his sweatshirt was dripping, and his hands, hidden in his pockets, were shaking. From the cold, from hunger, or both. His name was Miles. And this wasn't the first time he'd seen someone in trouble. But something about her caught his attention. Maybe it was the way she tried to look strong. Or maybe because no one else was stopping. Miles crossed the street without thinking. And as the woman tried once more to place the jack, he appeared at her side like a wet shadow. "Need help?" he said, his voice hoarse, almost childish but firm. She startled, instinctively stepping back. "I don't have any money, okay? You can go away." "I didn't ask for money," Miles replied, crouching next to the tire as if he was already familiar with the area. "You're putting the jack in the wrong spot. You'll end up bending the bodywork." She hesitated, looked around. It was just him. The sidewalk was empty, the cars kept driving by, indifferent, and he seemed to know what he was doing. "I swear I'm not going to steal anything," he said, as if he was used to having to prove he was human. "I promise." Without responding, she stepped back. She allowed it, and in just a few minutes Miles had adjusted the jack's position, carefully raised the car, and started changing the tire. His hands were small but skillful. He changed the nuts calmly, aligned the spare tire, and finished the job more efficiently than many adults. When he stood up, his forehead was sweaty, and his hands were black with grease. "Done." She just looked at him, for a few seconds, as if she were seeing something rare. A contrast so obvious it hurt. That boy didn't belong on the streets. "How do you know how to do this?" "I hang around the shops. I learned by watching. Sometimes they let me clean the floor in exchange for food." The answer hit like a punch to the stomach. The woman opened her purse. Miles immediately took a step back. "I don't want any money." "It's not money," she said, pulling out a small business card. "My name is Eloise. I work at a dealership, Chestnut Motors. If one day, I don't know, you need anything, look for me." He took the card with suspicion, as if it were a trap. He looked at it, read it silently, then carefully tucked it away. "Thank you," and disappeared into the rain. 3 days later, she saw him again, by chance crossing the same street, but this time he was sitting on the ground, leaning against the wall of a fast food restaurant, his eyes red and his face bruised. Eloise stopped the car in the middle of the avenue. She got out without thinking. "Miles?" He looked up. For the first time, he seemed smaller than he was. "They kicked my backpack, took my blanket." Eloise took a deep breath. She was about to say something that would change both of their lives, but she was also scared. Scared of getting involved, of opening wounds that had barely healed. "Do you still have my card?" Miles nodded. "Then listen, come by tomorrow. There's an opening at the car wash." It's temporary, but it's a start. Silence. He didn't answer, but his eyes said everything. And when she returned to the car, her hands shook as much as they had that day with the tire. Because deep down she knew, this boy hadn't shown up in her life by chance. She spent the rest of the day with the image of him in her head, not because of his skill with the tire, but because of the look before he disappeared. A look that said, "Thank you," but also said, "Don't expect to see me again." Eloise knew that type of goodbye. It was the kind that comes from someone who's used to being invisible. She didn't know why she had given him the card. It was an impulse, maybe guilt, maybe instinct. She only knew that that night she went to bed later than usual and dreamed of the boy's eyes. 2 days passed without any sign of him. At the dealership, the routine went on. Spreadsheets, meetings, a customer who complained about the smell of coffee, an employee who asked for a raise. Nothing out of place, except for that nagging discomfort deep down. Eloise had been driving slower in the last few days, looking at the corners of the city, as if something might appear if she just paid more attention. And it did. When she stopped at a traffic light near the abandoned square downtown, she saw a familiar figure leaning against a wall covered in graffiti. Miles was there with his torn backpack on his lap and a piece of cardboard under his feet. His face was bruised. She parked without thinking twice, with the hazard lights blinking in the middle of the lane. Miles tried to move away when he saw her, as if fearing a sermon, a rescue, or a trap. She didn't say anything at first, just extended a bottle of water and a protein bar. He took them slowly but didn't eat. He said he was fine, that he had just tripped. But the truth was written in his eyes. Someone had beaten him up, probably over food or for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The streets had their own rules and Miles knew them all. She hesitated for a second, then said something she hadn't planned. "Do you still have my card?" Miles pulled out the crumpled piece from his pants pocket. He still kept it. That said everything. She took a deep breath and crouched down beside him. "Tomorrow morning, if you want. There's a spot there. Just washing cars. It's not much, but it's a start. Are you going?" He looked at her for a long time. He thought. Didn't answer. Just nodded, almost imperceptibly. Eloise didn't insist. She left another bottle of water and went back to the car with her heart racing, feeling that maybe, for the first time in a long time, she had done something that really mattered. The next morning she arrived earlier than usual. She had the yard arranged, asked for the warehouse to be cleaned, and stayed near the reception pretending to organize files. But in reality, waiting. Every minute felt longer. 9:15, 9:30, almost 10. And then, at the entrance gate he appeared, wearing the same clothes as the day before, his hair wet and his eyes red. Eloise didn't smile immediately. She just made a gesture with her head, signaling for him to come in. One of the older employees wrinkled his nose and muttered something that she ignored. Miles was taken to the car wash area, where Roy, the technician, briefly explained the basics. Miles listened in silence, without interrupting, without showing emotion. On the first day he washed 4 cars. On the second, 7. On the third, 9, with full detailing, perfect windows, and dry tires wiped with a microfiber cloth. He didn't talk much, but he was always attentive. Never asked for anything. Didn't even ask when he could go home. When there were no more cars, he organized the products, swept the floor, scrubbed corners that no one had asked to clean. He worked like someone trying to prove, with every gesture, that he deserved to stay there. Eloise watched from a distance. She didn't want to suffocate him. She didn't want to seem overly protective. She knew that trust in this case was like an open wound. If touched, it could become infected. But she began to leave small things available. A new pair of socks in the locker, a clean cap hanging on the hook. Miles never commented. He just wore them the next day, as if they had always been his. On the first Friday, she found him sitting alone in the cafeteria after work. The plate was empty. He ate as if it were his only meal of the day. Eloise sat across from him with a cup of tea and casually asked if he wanted to keep the job. Miles just nodded. But before going back to the yard, he said without looking at her, "I've never had a badge before." And that was all. But it was enough for Eloise to cry for the first time in months. Not out of sadness, but from something she couldn't yet name. That weekend she went to the city's uniform store. She had a piece made in his size with his name embroidered on the pocket. When she gave him the uniform, Miles held it with both hands as if it were made of glass, and he said nothing. But he put it on right there, without waiting. The following Monday, he arrived earlier than anyone else. He was standing at the gate at 6 a.m. No one told him to. He just wanted to be there. He wanted to make sure he was still a part of it. That week, it started to rain heavily again. And while the employees complained about the mud, Miles kept working in silence, washing cars with an almost sacred dedication. One of the salesmen called him the workshop rat, laughing loudly with the other colleagues. Miles didn't react. He didn't know if it was a joke or an insult. But at night, after everyone had gone home, he stayed alone in the yard, cleaning every car meticulously, as if telling himself that no nickname could erase what he was building. Eloise saw it all from the window, and for the first time she thought, if this boy were my son, I would be proud of him. In the third week, Roy showed up with an old toolbox. It was rusty around the edges, with his name scratched into the side. He handed it to Miles without saying anything. The boy opened it slowly, as if receiving an inheritance, and saw a set of wrenches, pliers, an old flashlight, and a tape measure with no end. It was all worn out, but it was more than he'd ever had. "Don't mess it up," was all Roy said. "I'll take care of it," Miles replied, his eyes firmer than ever. That afternoon, when no one was looking, Miles cleaned every tool with a toothbrush, wiping them with cloth after cloth until all the accumulated dust was gone. He then stored everything in the broom closet, which he silently began to call his workshop. That 2-square-meter space became his territory, a corner just for him. For the first time, there was something that was his. But not everything was straightforward. One day, Miles didn't show up. Eloise tried to convince herself it was nothing. Maybe he was tired. Maybe he found a better side job. She tried to focus on the customers, but deep down, it hurt. His absence was louder than all the engines in the store running at the same time. When he returned the next day, he was wearing the same dirty hoodie, with a cut above his eyebrow. Roy didn't ask anything. Eloise tried to start a conversation, but Miles only said it was a misunderstanding with some guys from the street. Then he went back to work as if it was normal, and maybe it was. At the end of the day, she had a fresh set of clothes placed in his makeshift locker, a gray hoodie and a black t-shirt, nothing with the store logo, just clean, dry fabric. When she left that day, she saw Miles wearing the new clothes. He was standing in front of the bathroom mirror, looking at himself with a kind of beautiful estrangement, like he didn't recognize who was there, as if he were seeing the first version of someone still being born. A month later, the store broke the record for the most cars washed. Miles had created a new system, categorizing them as quick, intermediate, and detailed washes. He wrote it all down in an old notebook, with crooked letters and simple but functional drawings. Roy laughed when he saw it. "This kid's going to end up taking my place," and he said, half joking, half serious. Eloise took the notebook and put it in a drawer in the administration office. She said it was company intellectual property. Miles smiled with his eyes, but he hid it. He still didn't know how to react to compliments. One random Friday after work, Miles was sitting on the hood of an old car parked in the back of the store. The sky was orange, and the cold wind began to signal the coming winter. Eloise walked by with the keys in her hand, ready to leave. She saw the boy staring at the horizon, with an expression of someone thinking too much for someone so young. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "I'm good," he answered, without taking his eyes off the sky. "Are you hungry?" "A little." She opened her bag, took out a pack of cookies, and handed them to him. She sat next to him even though the seat was cold. They sat there in silence for a while. "Do you have family, Miles?" The question came out softer than she had planned. He took a while to answer. He broke a cookie in half before speaking. "I had a brother, Travis. He was older. We were taken to different places. I tried to find him, but he disappeared. They say he went to another state. I don't know." Eloise listened in silence. She wanted to say she would help him, that she could look for him, that she knew people, but she didn't say anything. She just placed her hand on the hood and said, "If you ever want to try again, we can try together." Miles didn't respond, but the way he looked at her was different. It wasn't gratitude, not hope. It was something deeper, like he had just found a forgotten piece of himself. That night, Eloise climbed the stairs at home, entered her son's room, and stood still in the doorway. The lights were off and the pillow still smelled the same. For the first time in a long time, she didn't cry. She smiled, softly, like someone who understands that things don't go back to how they were, but they can start to be something new. The following week, Miles arrived at the store with eyes deeper than usual. He was holding a crumpled piece of paper in his hands and seemed nervous. Eloise noticed from afar and left earlier than usual, without announcing her presence. When she got close, he quickly hid the paper inside his pants as if afraid that good news might be confiscated. She didn't ask anything. She simply offered a coffee and a break. Miles declined the coffee but stayed. They sat near the warehouse where the wind passed like a sigh between the piles of tires. After a few minutes of silence, he took the paper from his pocket and handed it to her, without saying a word. It was an old, faded poster, one of those on community bulletin boards. At the top it read, "Family Reunions, State Project for Homeless Youth." Below that, a picture of a young man, slanted eyes, wide smile, shaved sides of the head. Travis. His name was there, with the date of his last known whereabouts, 3 years ago. A neighboring city just 2 hours away. Miles was trembling, not from the cold, but from the weight of being perhaps too close to something that always seemed too far. "I found this at the shelter yesterday," he finally said. It was old, almost in the trash. Eloise took the paper carefully as if it were sacred. She read it twice. Then she looked at Miles. "Do you want to go there?" He hesitated, as if the question was bigger than it seemed. Finally, he nodded affirmatively. Eloise took a deep breath. "We'll go. Just let me organize everything for tomorrow." Miles smiled. A quick smile, almost hidden, as if afraid to spend too much hope all at once. The next day, he showed up with his hair combed. He had used gel and his clothes were folded neatly, even though they were still the same. Eloise noticed the effort. She noticed everything. The drive to the city was silent. Miles stared out the window the entire time, gripping the poster with so much force that it became more crumpled. When they arrived at the address, it was a small community center, hidden behind a church. A staff member greeted them, polite but cold. He searched the name on a digital file and asked them to wait. 10 minutes later, he returned with a confused expression. He was here, yes, but that was over a year ago. He was relocated to another shelter in Bridgeport. They should have more information there. Miles looked down, not disappointed, just tired, like someone who had always expected hope to have yet another obstacle. On the way back, Eloise tried to say something. She wanted to promise they would go to Bridgeport, that they wouldn't give up. But she stopped in the middle of the sentence. She felt that too many words sometimes just get in the way. When they got back to the dealership, Roy was sitting at the back, working on an old engine with the radio playing softly. Miles went straight to him, without rest, as if he needed his hands to keep moving so his heart wouldn't fall apart. In the following days, he didn't bring up the subject. He returned to the routine with even more focus. He washed, polished, organized, and repaired. He began learning how to disassemble parts with Roy, observing every detail with the precision of someone who understands that everything in the world can fit back together, even broken hearts. Eloise, on the other hand, began to act behind the scenes. She called Bridgeport. She spoke to social workers. She requested old reports. And one afternoon, when Miles was alone in the cafeteria, she arrived with a printed sheet in her hand. She handed it over like she was sharing a secret. Travis was in Bridgeport. That was 7 months ago. They said he left after turning 18. He didn't want to be transferred. They said he wanted to find his brother. Miles stood still. His eyes glazed over on the sheet for a few seconds. Then, he pressed the paper to his chest with both hands, closed his eyes, and stayed like that for a time Eloise would never forget. Does that mean he's looking for him too? It means he never stopped. That night, when everyone had gone home, Eloise went down to the yard. She found Miles washing a car for the second time, not because it was dirty, but because he seemed not to want the day to end. She watched for a few minutes, and when he finished, without saying anything, she extended something to him. A small box with a key. "This is yours now. It's the key to the makeshift workshop. It's long past time to call it yours." Miles looked at the key as if it were made of gold. He pressed his lips together, slowly put the key in his pocket with his eyes full and simply said, Thank you. There were no hugs, no speeches, but something invisible happened there, as if a bond had been sealed between two mended lives. And for the first time, perhaps since forever, Miles went to sleep with the certainty that he belonged somewhere. The atmosphere had changed, not the skies, but the routines. In the small gestures, in the prolonged silences, in the way Miles started arriving a little later and staying after hours, as if he didn't want to return to the world outside the dealership walls. Something inside him was settling down, like fresh cement taking shape. Roy said he had a grip. He was already letting Miles take apart engine parts on his own, supervising from a distance but no longer correcting every step. The colleagues, slowly, also changed their tone. Some remained harsh but without the laughter. Others began calling him by his name, no longer by nicknames. Miles listened attentively to everything. He didn't show anything, but he took note of everything inside. Eloise, on the other hand, felt lighter. At night, she prepared an extra meal, even though she knew he might not have dinner with her. She was relearning how to have expectations, something that had hurt more than it had helped for a long time. She no longer locked the front door in a rush. She left a light on, just in case. It was on a cloudy Wednesday morning, in the middle of the day, that the visit arrived. A well-dressed woman, square heels, a black folder in hand. She seemed out of place there, among tires, grease, and the smell of gasoline. She asked for Eloise at the reception and was escorted to her office with the formality of someone carrying bad news without realizing it. Good morning. My name is Anna Keating. I'm from the Department of Social Assistance. I'm here to talk about a boy who, according to a report, is working here. His name is Miles Rowan. Eloise felt the name hit her like a warning, not of danger, but of fragility, as if something carefully built was about to be tested. The woman continued. We received an alert. A video posted on social media shows the boy working with tools. Although he's been praised, the exposure caught attention. There's an open file on him. He's registered as a missing minor, and technically he's under state custody. Eloise held the weight of that information as best as she could. She took a deep breath, tried not to react with anger, not with fear. He's not running away. He's just living, trying to build something. The social worker nodded gently, but her eyes were cold, procedural. I understand, but if there's no legal documentation authorizing this arrangement, we'll need to intervene. The priority is to ensure the minor is in a supervised environment, with appropriate care. We know you lost a son. Perhaps this has awakened a desire for emotional repair, which is natural. Eloise didn't respond, but her blood boiled. That stung in a very specific way, as if suddenly she wasn't seen as someone helping, but as someone taking advantage of her own pain. The woman handed her a document, an evaluation notice. She said she would return in a week, and until then, the boy would need to be sent to the nearest shelter, temporarily, just until the situation was regularized. Eloise waited for the door to close to let her breath escape. She sat in the chair like someone who'd taken a blow. She stayed there for long minutes, staring at the paper, the time, the doubt. When she left the office, Miles had already noticed something was off. The looks were different. Roy didn't say anything. The yard was silent. Eloise approached and said they needed to talk. Alone, in her office. He walked in slowly, as if he already knew the outcome before the conversation even started. He sat in the chair across from her, in a clean uniform with his name badge hanging from his chest. It was almost comical, dressed as an employee but treated like an impending absence. Eloise explained everything. The words came slowly but without embellishment. She told him that someone had made a report, that there were protocols, that it wasn't enough just to welcome him. Permission was needed, that maybe he would need to go just for a while until everything was sorted out. Miles didn't cry, didn't shout, didn't ask why. He just lowered his head. He stayed like that for so long that Eloise thought about touching him, but she didn't have the courage. When he finally spoke, his voice came firm but low. That's why I don't stay anywhere. There's always a rule, a small line on some paper. Someone who comes and says I can't be where I am. Eloise wanted to say she wouldn't let him go, that she would fight, that she would do whatever it took. But at that moment, any promise felt too fragile. All she could offer was her presence, and that's what she did. She stayed there, beside him, in silence, until the end of the day, until the sun disappeared behind the workshop. The social worker returned the following week, punctual, with the same black folder and the same bureaucratic tone. She brought with her two options. Either Miles would be relocated to a temporary shelter while Eloise sought legal guardianship, or the state would take legal action to remove him by force for non-compliance with regulations. Eloise tried to argue. She said he had a job, a routine, and was studying at night. She showed the records, the spreadsheets, the videos of his progress with the engines. All the things that were alive to her were just circumstantial to Anna. "I'm sorry, but goodwill doesn't replace legal procedure. You need to present the documentation. The deadline is tomorrow." Eloise left the meeting with her nerves frayed. She went up to her office and stared at the picture of her son for endless minutes. Then she locked herself in and spent the afternoon on calls with lawyers, notaries, and the Child Protection Council. She sent documents, scanned everything she could, moved what seemed impossible to give legality to the only thing that truly made sense in her life since Trevor's death. By the end of the day, when the natural light had faded and the sound of rain was tapping on the zinc roof of the workshop, she went downstairs to tell Miles. She found him cleaning a windshield for the second time, even though it wasn't necessary. He already knew. She said that she could get guardianship, that it would take work, but it was possible, that there were legal loopholes, a favorable history, employee support, but he would have to wait, and during that time, he might have to be away. He looked at her with a silent exhaustion, took a step back, leaned on the car, and breathed deeply. "I don't want to leave. I don't want you to leave either. But I'm tired, Eloise, of being moved, of being separated, of being interrupted every time I start to think I can stay." Eloise felt that like a blade. She wanted to say this time was different, but she knew that for him, promises had been made too many times, and failed. The next morning, Miles didn't show up. The yard was empty, the wet cloth still on the tool cart. Roy searched for him around the area. Eloise called every shelter in the region. No one knew. That afternoon, the social worker came back to check the absence. She left a standard notice and left. But before she crossed the door, she stopped and said, "Not many people care like you do. I hope you get what you're trying for." Truly. Eloise just nodded. She didn't have the energy for another conversation. 2 nights passed. No sign. Roy began to grow restless. He'd scan the corners every time he went out for lunch. Eloise barely slept. The shop was quieter. Miles's uniform hanging behind the door felt like a warning of something that shouldn't have ended. On the 3rd day at dawn, Roy arrived earlier. The dealership gate was unlocked. The workshop light was on. Inside, the blue car, the old one considered a lost cause, was clean, polished, with the engine running at idle. Miles was at the wheel. Sweat-soaked t-shirt, red eyes, hands firmly on the wheel. "I fixed it. Since last month. In secret. I wanted to give it to you as a gift, but I didn't know when. I thought today was a good day." Roy didn't say anything. He simply opened the workshop door to let the sun in. Eloise arrived a few minutes later, her heart in her throat. When she saw him, she stopped in the middle of the yard, unsure whether to run or cry. Miles got out of the car, hands in his pockets, eyes welling up. "I just wanted to give something back. You gave me everything, and I don't know how to repay you." She approached slowly, placed a hand on his shoulder, as if still not believing. "The only thing you have to do is stay." He took a deep breath, looked around, then pulled a crumpled envelope from his pocket. It was the temporary guardianship paper. Signed, stamped. Roy had personally gone with Eloise to the notary the day before. They had done it. All that was left was for him to return to complete the process. Miles held the paper carefully, as if it still wasn't real, as if any wind could tear it all apart. But it didn't tear. Not anymore. That night, the dealership was closed. But a line of old cars waited to be washed. Roy put a tape on the workshop radio. Eloise ordered pizza, and Miles, for the first time, laughed loud enough for it to echo through the walls. The following week, they launched the program. Roy suggested the name. No one disagreed. Project Miles, a mechanical learning program for homeless teenagers. The first enrolled kid arrived shy, with dirty shoes and a photo in his pocket. Eloise was the one to receive him. The boy handed over the photo with trembling hands. "I was looking for someone. I heard about a place called Project Miles. His name is the same as my brother's. Do you think he's still here?" Miles appeared at the workshop door, stopped, looked at the photo. The silence fell like a muffled thunder. Travis? The world stopped for a second, and then it started again in a way no one expected. Do you believe that a small gesture, like changing a tire, can change the course of 2 lives? Share with us below the most unexpected encounter that transformed your story. Your experience might touch someone who needs to believe again. If this story moved you, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Every click of yours helps spread messages that warm, heal, and reconnect. You are part of this, and maybe this is exactly what someone needed to hear today. Now stay tuned for another touching story that's playing on your screen. See you there.